This year, I'm selling all my Nikon DSLR camera gear and switching entirely to a Sony mirrorless system. And before you jump to the comments, hear me out. This video is not about Nikon being worse than Sony. In fact, I'll show you many reasons why it's been a huge struggle for me to switch to Sony. And to be perfectly clear, I have bought every single piece of equipment you see here with my own money and have never been sponsored or accepted anything from Nikon, Sony, Canon, or any other camera manufacturer. If you're a Nikon user, you might ask, doesn't Nikon already have a top-notch mirrorless camera system? And the answer to that is yes, they do. Their Z cameras and lenses are excellent. And before that, they even had the Nikon 1 system that had its own virtues but never really gained traction and caused Nikon to lose a lot of ground in mirrorless. But there's one other major reason I decided to go with Sony, and that's their aps-c lineup. One main reason a lot of people mention for switching from DSLR cameras to mirrorless is to save on weight or camera size. That's not my reason, and really it's kind of a BS reason a lot of times. No matter what kind of camera you have, light is light, and physics dictates certain lenses have certain designs. Tricks like phase Fresnel can make lenses smaller sometimes, but that has nothing to do with a mirror and pentaprism in the camera body. In any case, the main reason I made the switch was actually COVID. You see, if I were still shooting a few events per year, I would probably stick with full frame and likely upgrade to Nikon's Z system. But COVID made sure all the events I normally shoot were canceled. So I don't need the excellent all-day photography features that I love about the Nikon system. I also started making more videos last year, and in terms of video on DSLRs, Nikon falls pretty flat compared to even low-end mirrorless cameras. On the Z-mount cameras, Nikon does a lot better, especially in the high-end, but a lot of the controls on Sony bodies, especially for focusing and flexible shooting scenarios, are way better for an individual content creator like me. And before I get into the meat of this video, I wanted to mention that switching entire camera systems is a huge change. It's something I've been pondering and testing for over a year. There are so many things besides a camera body and a lens that you have to change out, and everything costs a ton, even if you're selling all your old gear like I am. I have strobes, flash triggers, remotes, filters, specialized bags, expensive mounting adapters for certain lenses, and that's in addition to all the lenses I've bought over 20 years using Nikon. And also, one other thing I'm doing is different than what many people do on their photography journey. I'm switching from full frame, or FX in Nikon speak, to aps-c, or DX in Nikon speak. This isn't really typical. Many people go the other way to get more light in the frame or for other creative reasons. But since I'm doing more video now and the crop sensor and smaller body is actually beneficial in many circumstances, I found that for me, switching to a smaller system outweighs the image quality benefits I get with full frame cameras, especially since almost all my still photography is just YouTube thumbnails, controlled lighting illustrations, and candid family pictures. If I still made income as a stills event photographer, there's a very good chance I'd still be playing in Nikon's sandbox. But since I wanted to downsize to crop sensor bodies, I decided to go Sony, and the main reason for that? Sony actually seems to respect their crop sensor users. Nikon has had DX cameras since the early days of professional digital photography, but ever since they made the first FX camera, the D3, and it's an amazing camera, one of my favorite cameras of all time, it seems like they pay DX users lip service. Besides releasing a steady stream of cheap low-end DX glass, pro-quality DX isn't really a thing. And even though Nikon released a DX mount Z camera, the Z50, it doesn't look like they want to release any premium S glass specific for the DX sensor size. I even bought the Z50 thinking I could just live with buying full-frame glass and using Nikon's F-to-Z adapter, but it just wasn't a great experience. I think for Nikon, they see aps-c as some sort of beginner or entry-level frame size. They knocked the D500 out of the park as a camera body, and it was amazing when it was released, but besides using it with giant full-frame lenses, it's basically a crop sensor D5. Nikon never really maintained an ecosystem around their DX cameras after the early 2010s. So here are some of the things I love and hate about Nikon, especially my DSLRs, and about Sony. The first thing I love about Nikon's bodies is the grip. And the D750 is actually one that I like the least out of a lot of the modern Nikon bodies. But the grips on Nikons are organic and they're designed in a way that's built for a human hand so well. Canon's also really good about this. It seems like the designers probably spend a ton of time working on how do we make this thing feel amazing. From the fact that the actual shutter button is in a place where your finger kind of flows to it, to the fact that the grip has a nice deep area to let you really get a hold of it. I can hold these cameras, even though they weigh more than my Sonys, the new smaller Sonys, I can hold these things all day. And if you put a battery grip on it, that gives you another vertical shutter button and everything, and it gives you more space to put your pinky. You can hold these things forever with giant lenses, and that's really the thing that I think I like the most about Nikon, and to some extent Canon. Another thing I love about Nikon, especially the DSLRs with the F-mount, is the fact that there are so many lenses you can choose from. Nikon has been producing F-mount lenses and in excellent quality for decades now. This is one of my favorite lenses, and it's an older lens. It's a 60mm micro Nikkor. It's a macro lens. It's actually not one of the more popular macro lenses for Nikon, but what it is it's extremely cheap compared to a lot of other ones. And it has great quality for reproducing documents or getting close-ups, or even as a portrait lens. Sometimes I use it like that. But this lens only cost me a couple $100 used, and Nikon has thousands of lenses like this on eBay and Craigslist and everywhere, so it's always easy to find lenses. And the other thing about Nikon is they have a legacy of the best lenses in certain classes. Nikon has always had a trinity of lenses. They're ultra-wide, standard, and telephoto zoom lenses, and this was the first lens that I bought that I was really like splurging on getting a lens that I loved and would rent for every single event I shot, a 70 to 200mm VR lens. This was one of the first lenses Nikon introduced in the digital era that was like absolutely gold. Nikon has so many lenses where they really knocked it out of the park, and they're still doing that in the Z mount. But like I said, they're not really doing it with the DX size or aps-c size lenses, where you can save a little bit on weight and make a smaller lens. They're just focusing all their efforts on the FX frame. I also love, and this is something more about DSLRs in general still, unless you're talking about the highest end, most expensive mirrorless bodies, even a cheaper DSLR has tons of speed. When I turn it on, it's ready to take a picture within milliseconds. The body is just so responsive when you're switching modes and things, and a lot of that is due to the fact that the sensor is not reading out live data and the processor doesn't have to process it all the time, but that is a big advantage when you're shooting certain things like sports, where you want to have multiple camera bodies and just always be ready for the shot. Unless you pay tons of money right now for the highest end mirrorless bodies, you're not going to get the same speed out of the body, and that's one thing I really love about my Nikons. Another thing I'm not really happy about with Nikon is the fact that they kind of lost their leadership in mirrorless after the Nikon 1 system. Nikon 1, they chose a sensor size 1" that's a little too small for the quality, and around that time Sony started going all in on mirrorless, as Nikon was kind of pulling back because of the lack of success they had with those cameras. And Sony was not as good as Nikon at that point, but Sony put the pedal to the metal and passed up Nikon pretty quickly. And so I'm disappointed in that. I know Nikon is doing a lot to regain ground, but it's been disappointing seeing that difference. Another thing that's disappointing to me is the fact that the new Z system doesn't support older lenses, at least not with autofocus, like one of my favorites, the 60mm Micro Nikkor D. And this lens and hundreds of other lenses like it are available really cheap used, and kind of open up new boundaries for photographers who are looking to get into photography but not spend a fortune getting into it. And by kind of cutting out the market for these on the Z system, Nikon kind of shot themselves in the leg a little bit. The FTZ adapter is decent, but if it had a built-in motor, if there's a version with a built-in motor, that would have opened up the doors for many more photographers like me to jump in head first, instead of kind of being hesitant because I still have some glass that I love that doesn't have a built-in focus motor. It's also a little bit annoying being trash-talked by popular YouTubers who seem to be getting thrown tons of cash and free vacations by Sony, and I'm only being a little bit sarcastic on that. Only a little. One thing I really like on the Sony bodies is the controls and especially the autofocus you get in video mode. That's one thing that on the Nikon it sometimes would get in the way, but on the Sony cameras it gets out of the way and just lets me focus on getting the shot I need. Another thing that's great on these Sonys is just the overall autofocus system. It's set up in a way that you don't really have to think about it too much, but when you need to, you can. Whereas on the Nikon side, there's a lot of times, on the mirrorless cameras at least, where you're trying to do something and the way it's set up just doesn't feel intuitive and you have to remember how to do something specifically. The other thing that's great about the Sony system, and this is probably like I said, the reason that I'm most interested in switching, is they have a lot of support for their aps-c crop sensor system. They've released new lenses in the past couple years. Nikon, besides all the cheap low-end lenses, hasn't really released a Pro DX lens in 5 or 10 years. And that's really the thing that makes me the most interested. Is I know that I will have support and I'll have new camera bodies in this form factor because it's a great system size for somebody that doesn't need full frame. I think the thing I hate most about the Sony bodies though is that grip. And this is the reason why if I were still shooting event photography, I would probably not go with Sony. At least, you know, I haven't tried the A9 or A9 II. Maybe those bodies are better. I know especially for the lower end Sonys, these grips are just they're not made for human hands. I don't know what they're made for, but I kind of hate them. And I have the A6600 as well, and it has a bigger grip, but it's still so angular and nothing flows. It doesn't feel like it's made for my hand to come in and hold it. And part of that too is when you go aps-c, the camera body's a little smaller, so of course it's going to jab in your hand, but little things like this not being more rounded over, this top surface not really taking my finger in and making it want to take a picture. Things like that I really don't like about the Sonys. But like I said, the main reason I'm switching is for video work. And in video, you're often not holding the camera. You have the camera mounted in a cage, or you have it mounted in a teleprompter or something like that. So that's not as big a deal when you're doing video. But for photography, I just love being able to hold a more organic camera body like this one. Another thing that I don't really enjoy about a lot of Sony's lenses is they have power zoom, which I guess for some video purposes it's nice to be able to zoom in and out like that. But if you're doing professional video, you usually have a rig that does the zooming for you. And the most annoying thing about it is I'll turn on the camera and I'll zoom in on something, and then I'll need to adjust something, so I'll come back to the camera. It will have shut off and it loses your zoom setting if it powers down and powers back up, which is really annoying, especially if you had it zoomed just so in the right framing and everything. A lot of modern lenses also have focus by wire, which I find kind of annoying too. I like being able to hold the camera in my hand, focus physically, and even if the camera's off, and then get things nailed in when I have the camera on. But that might just be my old ways. The other thing that I hate about the Sony cameras is they don't give you a ton of control over audio recording. So the A6600 body does have a mic in jack, but it has this built-in automatic gain control thing. And this has been a problem with many Sony cameras through the years. I don't know why they don't fix this. There's no ability to turn that off. So if you're like me and you have silent periods between shots or something like that, the automatic gain control turns up the ambient sound to some crazy level, and then the first thing you say explodes, and then it turns it down really quick because it's automatic gain control. But unless you're a vlogger or something crazy like that, it's not really a good system for the human voice, I find. So there you have it. I think partly this video is a love letter to the 16 years I lived in Nikon's F-mount DSLR ecosystem. I remember the amazing feeling of the D3 in a fast lens the first time I tried it. It was like holding a light vacuum cleaner in my hands, and it performed so well in low light. And I remember every upgrade from a D40 to D90 to D7000 to D750, and renting almost every FX camera that was released for different events. And more than 100,000 photos I've taken with my Nikon cameras. But life moves on. I don't do as much stills work these days, and while I'll be keeping my D700 and one lens for sentimental reasons, it's time for me to say goodbye to all the rest of my Nikon gear and start falling in love with some of the new lenses in Sony's lineup. Hey kids, please don't bounce your ball right now. They're playing with their ball. This year I'm selling all of my Nikon this is going way too fast. Oh boy. It's like zoom. Okay. The point of doing this video is so I can get rid of all this stuff and get the money for it.